Raymond Wilson sat alone in his dimly lit apartment, the final decree of his third divorce lying on the table in front of him, like a trophy he didn't want to own. At 45, he had loved, married, and divorced 3 times, and each ending had been a bitter reminder of his inability to maintain a lasting relationship. As he glared at the papers, he convinced himself that the problem wasn't him. No, the problem was American women. They were too independent, too opinionated. He wanted someone who would value his word, someone loyal and submissive. That's what he thought marriage was supposed to be. Raymond spent hours that night browsing online, stumbling upon forums and websites where men exchanged stories of finding traditional wives overseas, especially in Africa. He read about how these women were supposedly raised to respect their husbands and believed in marriage as a sacred duty. Raymond's heart raced. This was what he wanted, a wife who would love and respect him without question. He was sure that an African woman could offer him the loyalty he'd been missing. With this thought in mind, he immediately joined an international dating site, setting his profile to specifically target young African women. Within days, Raymond's inbox was flooded with messages, but one stood out: Nandi, a 25-year-old from Nairobi, Kenya. Her messages were warm, gentle, and filled with curiosity about his life in America. She seemed innocent, her messages free from cynicism and full of hope. Over time, they began video calling, and Raymond found himself captivated by her kindness, her soft-spoken nature, and the light in her eyes. She was nothing like his ex-wives. She was everything he believed a wife should be. During their conversations, Raymond painted a beautiful picture of life in America, promising her a life filled with love and security. He told her he'd take care of her, that she wouldn't have to worry about a thing. He promised he'd provide for her dreams, support her in exploring her own interests. "You'll be my queen," he'd say, his voice dripping with sincerity. Nandi believed him. Coming from a humble background, she had always dreamt of a life where she could build something meaningful with a partner. Raymond seemed to be everything she'd hoped for: mature, stable, and ready to commit. Raymond couldn't wait to make it official. He booked a flight to Kenya within a few months of their online courtship and proposed soon after arriving. The wedding was a modest, joyful celebration with her family and friends. Nandi was ecstatic, filled with hope for the future. When she boarded the plane with Raymond to the United States, she felt like she was entering a new world of possibilities. But the honeymoon period faded quickly. The moment they settled into Raymond's home, his warm words began to disappear, replaced by a sense of entitlement and authority. He wanted her to cook, clean, and do all the household chores without any help. The first few days, she assumed it was just an adjustment period, and she wanted to impress him, so she worked tirelessly to keep the house spotless and prepare his meals just as he liked. However, Raymond's demands grew. He would inspect her work with a critical eye, pointing out tiny imperfections, sometimes snapping at her if he found a speck of dust, or if dinner wasn't seasoned to his taste. He'd tell her, "This is your job, Nandi. In my country, a wife looks after her husband." When she tried to discuss the workload or suggest they share some responsibilities, he'd dismiss her, saying, "This is what I brought you here for. You wanted a life in America. Well, this is it." When Nandi expressed interest in working or continuing her studies, Raymond scoffed. "No wife of mine is going to be out there like some career woman, mingling with strangers," he said. "I provide everything you need. Just focus on the home." And when she brought up that he'd promised her she could explore her dreams, he waved it off, saying, "You'll thank me later. Trust me, you don't need that." Her life became an endless cycle of chores. She was expected to wake up before Raymond and ensure breakfast was ready. During the day, she'd clean every inch of the house, prepare his favorite meals, and run errands. By evening, she was exhausted, but Raymond rarely showed any appreciation. Instead, he'd ask her why she looked tired, as if her exhaustion was an inconvenience to him. Nandi felt her sense of self slowly fading. The vibrant, hopeful woman she had been was now a shadow, enslaved to Raymond's unending demands. She became increasingly isolated. Raymond restricted her access to social interactions, claiming it was for her own good. He'd say, You don't need to be out there making friends who'll just fill your head with nonsense. He monitored her phone calls, especially with her family in Kenya, limiting her conversations so she wouldn't worry them. No need to tell them everything, he'd say whenever she tried to share her struggles. One afternoon, desperate for some human connection, Nandi confided in a neighbor she'd met briefly during one of her rare outings. The woman, an immigrant herself, listened compassionately and offered her contact information for a local support group. That night, when Raymond found the note, he was furious. He accused her of disrespecting him by bringing strangers into their lives, ripping the note into pieces, and warning her never to seek help again. The next day, Nandi locked herself in the bathroom, staring at her reflection. She hardly recognized herself. Her spirit had been broken, her joy extinguished. She realized that the love Raymond had promised her was a lie. She had been chosen not for who she was, but for how easy she would be to control. Raymond wanted obedience, not love. Nandi knew she couldn't live this way any longer. It took weeks of secret planning, but one night, after Raymond had gone to bed, she slipped out of the house with a small bag and enough money for a bus ticket to a women's shelter she'd read about online. Heart-pounding, she boarded the bus and sat in silence, fearing Raymond would somehow find her. But as the distance between her and his house grew, she began to feel a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in months, she could breathe. At the shelter, she was welcomed by other women, many of whom shared similar stories of struggle and resilience. With their support, Nandi found her voice again. She enrolled in English classes, determined to improve her language skills and gain more independence. Through the support group, she learned about her rights and discovered resources available to immigrants like herself. With each passing day, she grew stronger, regaining the confidence that Raymond had tried to strip from her. Nandi also sought therapy, working through the pain and betrayal she had felt. She began to understand that she had been manipulated, that Raymond's promises had been empty from the start. Through her journey, she met people who offered her genuine friendship and support, allowing her to heal and grow. She reached out to her family in Kenya, explaining the hardships she had endured. They were heartbroken but supportive, proud of her strength and her decision to leave. Months later, Nandi found work at a small cafe, where she became known for her warmth and kindness, traits that had once been stifled. She saved every penny she could, slowly rebuilding her life on her own terms. The pain of her experience lingered, but she was determined not to let it define her. She had survived, and she would continue to thrive. One day, Raymond showed up at her workplace, begging her to return, promising to change. But this time, Nandi was ready. She looked him in the eyes and said, "I wanted love, Raymond, not control. I deserve respect, not submission." With a calm dignity, she turned and walked away, leaving him speechless. Years later, Nandi had built a life filled with friendships, purpose, and independence. She became an advocate for immigrant women, using her story to inspire others to find their strength and seek help when needed. She had learned that love could never be forced or controlled. Real love was built on respect, trust, and mutual support, things Raymond had never given her. And as she shared her journey with others, she knew she had finally found her true home, within herself.